Yes. Okay, so this is 6A worksheet number 2 or homework number 2. These jokes are just a way, one, they're silly, but they are just a way for you to check your work, because you should be spelling out some words at the bottom. If you're not spelling out words and you're getting nonsense, check your work. Even though you can figure out the joke sometimes quicker than you do the 10 problems, I still expect you to do the 10 problems. First, let me remind you of the rules. So these are just the inequalities we've been doing for the last 2 days. But you'll notice that there are some that are just polynomials, some that are fractional, okay? So I expect to see 10 plus or minus charts on this paper for you to get full credit. Now, I would like to do some of the ones that are a little wonky, just so that we can, make sure we understand what's going on. So the first one I want to do is problem number 5. Okay, so everybody, let's do problem number 5. Now I'm going to add a sheet of paper so that when I do problem number 5, I just have a little more room, because there's just not a lot of room on these joke ones. There's not a lot. That's the only thing I don't like about them. You may have to add like a sheet of paper to get them done. Now there's some things wrong with problem number 5. It's not related to 0 and it's not in factored form. So the first thing we have to do is get it related to 0. I would suggest distributing this 2 and moving the 9 kind of in one step just to save you time. So this would be 4x squared minus 12x plus 9 is greater than 0. So all I did was distributed the 2 and added 9 to both sides. So now it's related to 0. Now the next thing we talked about is it has to be in factored form. So is that a factorable quantity? Well, it actually is. And so if we look, that's going to be 2x minus 3 and 2x minus 3. Now, how do we know that? You could use that technique, slide and divide. What I did in my head is 4 times 9 is 36. What are the factors of 36 that make 12? 6 and 6. So that's why you get 2 times 3 and 2 times 3 sort of thing. So that is the factored quantity. Now we only have 1 0. We only have 1 0. That is where 2x minus 3 equals 0. So if you set 2x equal to 3, you get x equals 3/2. Now remember, if our symbol is a symbol that includes the equal to, we're going to close in the dot on our plus or minus chart. Since it is not, we are going to leave it open. So we're going to draw our number line, and we're going to put an open circle on 3/2. Now remember, our job is to make our number line into a chart. Okay. We have 2 factors. Even though they match, we should include both, or we could put a square on both. It doesn't matter. And then we need some test values. Now 3/2 is 1.5. To the left of 1.5 is 0. To the right of 1.5 is 2. Anything to the left and right of those values will work. If you plug 0 into the top, you get a minus. Plug 0 into the bottom, you get a minus. 2 negatives do make a positive. If you plug 2 in, you get 4 minus 3, which is a positive. You get a positive, which is a positive. Now, the reason it's positive everywhere is because of the fact it was technically a 2x minus 3 squared. So, but here's the weird thing about this particular answer. We do not include the 3/2. So it's really every value on the number line except for 3/2. So we can have any x that is less than 3/2, or we can have any x that is greater than 3/2. We just can't have 3/2. So when we go up on the answer possibilities, the only one that shows 3/2 is D. So 5 is D. So you could put a little next to 5 that we found out that it was D. And then go down to your the answer to the joke spot and put a D at number 5. Okay, so that's what you're doing for this worksheet. Now, I would like to do a fractional one because those can be very confusing. So I think 9 is probably the hardest of our fractional ones. So now at this time, let's do problem number 9 together. Okay. Now, yesterday we talked about the rules for a fractional one. The first one we want is to relate it to 0. The second thing we want is to combine any fractions. The third thing we want to do is we want to get it into factored form. The fourth thing we want is to make our plus or minus chart. Okay, so if you follow those 4 steps for your fractional ones, you got it. Okay, so the first thing we have to do for number 9 is relate it to 0. So let's just take our 2x plus 5, leave it alone, but let's subtract our x plus 1 from both sides so that we have 0 on the other side. Now, it doesn't matter which side you move to, but for inequalities, we can see it a little clearer if we keep it on the left side, because then our symbol, if it's positive greater than 0, it would be positive, less than 0 would be negative. Okay, now how do we combine fractions? Well, what we want to do here is put each of the multi-termed pieces in parentheses. We're going to multiply the left side by the right denominator, x minus 1. We're going to do the right fraction by the left denominator, x plus 1. Now, you want to leave the bottom containing both pieces separated. We don't usually multiply out the bottoms unless there's something that would make our life easier, like if there were square roots, you might want to do it. But otherwise, just keep the bottom separated. But we actually physically have to do these multiplications. Okay, so let's do that. X minus 1 times 2x plus 5 is a FOIL. Remember, we got to distribute. If we distribute in the x, we get 2x squared plus 5x. Now we're going to distribute the negative 1. We get negative 2x minus 5. Now, if you can do all that in your head, go for it. Now, what I'm going to do here is I am going to you can do it 2 ways. You can do these 2 multiplications and then distribute the negative, but for time's sake, I'm going to distribute a negative x, then I'm going to distribute a negative 1, okay? If I distribute a negative x to this, I am going to get negative x squared minus x. And then if I distribute a negative 1, I'm going to get negative x negative minus 1. Okay. Now, remember my steps. Let's talk about the steps one more time. Related to 0, combine the fractions. Third step was to get it into factored form. It is not right now in factored form. It won't be in factored form until we make everything a lot prettier than we've got. Let's combine all our like terms. So our 2x squared minus x squared is x squared. 5x minus 2x is 3x, minus x is 2x, minus x is x. So we got a plus x. And then our numerical portion, we have a minus 5 and a minus 1, which is minus 6. So what we started with, that big long list, became pretty nice, but it's still not in factored form. Now, the zeros at the top can always happen by the quadratic formula since it's a quadratic. So if you are not great at factoring, feel free to find those zeros using the quadratic formula and then put them on the number line. But that is a nicely factorable quantity that factors to be x plus 3 and x minus 2. Okay, so think about our 3 steps. We have related it to 0, combined the fractions, got it in factored form. That's the hardest part. That's the hardest type. So now we're ready to find the zeros and put them on our plus or minus chart. So the top zeros are at negative 3 and positive 2. They will be open because there's no equal to there. Our bottom zeros are always open, no matter what the symbol is, and those zeros occur at 1 and negative 1. So now we're going to make a plus or minus chart for that information. Put those numbers in number line order. So I'm going to do negative 3, negative 1, 1, and 2. All of those are open circle. So the bottom is always open. The top's zeros are open or closed based upon the symbol in the problem. Okay, now we have to make a plus or minus chart here. There are 4 factors, so give yourself 4 rows. On the side, just list them out. So every factor from your original fraction should appear. So x plus 3, x minus 2, x minus 1, x plus 1. Let's pick some test values. To the left of negative 3 is negative 4. To the, or in between negative 3 and negative 2, or negative 1 is negative 2. Between negative 1 and 1 is 0. Between 1 and 2 is y naught 1.5. After 2, y naught 3. Now, there are millions of possibilities of test values. That's what just occurred to me. I try to pick numbers I feel are the nicest to plug in. Remember, you're only recording in your chart, do I get a positive or a negative at that particular location? Okay, so at negative 4, if we plug it into these, let's go down the list, we get a negative, a negative, a negative, and a negative. Now, those are either multiplied or divided. If you have 4 negatives multiplied or divided, an even number of negatives, it will become a positive. So that region is above the x-axis. That region, if you were to look at the graph, is positive. Now let's plug in negative 2 as our test value. We get a positive, we get a negative, and a negative. 3 negatives make a negative. That region of the graph is under the x-axis. That region of the graph is negative. Now let's plug in 0. If you plug in 0, we get a positive, a negative, and a positive. We have an even number of negatives again, so that region is a positive section of the graph. If we plug in 1.5, we get a positive, a negative, a positive, and a positive. One negative makes a negative region of the graph. And then if we look at 3, if we plug 3 into all of those, we get positives right down the board. And so if it starts all positive, it's going to stay all positive. Now let's go back and look at our simplified version. Remember, greater than means positive. So let's go on our graph paper number line plus minus chart, and let's color in the regions that are greater than 0, the regions that are positive. There's one, there's one, and there's one. So if we put it in interval notation, the interval notation, it would be from negative infinity to negative 3, from negative 1 to 1, from 2 to infinity. Now that's the interval notation. They use inequality notation. So it should have one that has 3 values. We should see negative 3, negative 1, 1, and 2 in it. But let me show you how you would write it as in an inequality. We can use values that are less than negative 3, or values that are between negative 1 and 1, or values that are greater than 2. So that is the inequality that matches the interval, or the interval that matches the inequality, however you want to think about it. So if we go back up to our answer information, let's find the answer that matches it. So we should have 3 distinct inequalities: less than negative 3, greater than 2, between negative 1 and positive 1. Okay, so let's go back up and let's find the answer that matches 9. So you can see clearly right here, it has 3 regions: less than negative 3, greater than 2, between negative 1 and positive 1. So we have now used L for number 9. So we're going to go down to this, find number 9, and we are going to put an L. Okay. So your job for the rest of class period is to do the other 8 problems and spell out a word, find out what the joke is, but I need to see all 10 problems plus or minus charts, even if you figure out what the joke is ahead of time. But that's a way to check your work. Okay, so there you go. Remember, you should have turned in by the end of today 3 worksheets, one from Tuesday, one from Wednesday, and one from Thursday. If you were absent for any of those, just put absent and get those in. There you go.